Using a mixture of paintings, items in museum collections, and any sort of visual artwork, this video is going to explore how the shape of women's clothing changed over time and how the desired shape is created by the different undergarments and different methods of clothing, and what this tells us about how ideas of gender have changed. So starting in ancient times, you can see here that the fabric is very basic. It's big squares that's let fall naturally. It's tied in at the waist in the centre dress, which is the chiffon. Whereas in the other one, you can see that there's jewellery and there is decorations mainly on top of it as part of it. I've also included this statue that shows how wide hips were the desirable feature. It was seen as good at childbearing. She is trying to cover her chest with a small bit of fabric in this, but I think this and the other two visual examples show how much modesty has changed and how sheer and how much they could expose without it being considered inappropriate. As we move on to the medieval era, you can still see these same large pieces of fabric, but now they've been adapted to create large sleeves and to drape more continuously over the body or with a cape on top. You can see in these pictures that these become more fitted. A waist has come in as a defined piece of the garment, and you can also see that it's open at the top for the first time, and there's this gap is later known as a stomacher, but it would not be at this point. This would just be showing the bodice underneath. You can also see the fact that they've got underskirts on in the processional picture. By the 1850s, we've got quite a defined shape. There's a square neck at the top and a fitted bodice that would be made by either boning the bodice itself or by pinning it shut over stays. Stays were an earlier version of a sort of corset. The bodice then becomes more pointed. The skirts at this time are supported from winter skirts and petticoats to what's called a farthingale. They're in this bell shape, this curved shape, almost like a cone, which shows off the tiny waist. And then we move into, as this almost wasp waist becomes more popular, this is the 1550s, we move into what's called a French wheel, which is basically like a hula hoop with matching circles underneath it. The working class wouldn't have had this. They'd have replaced this for the same idea with a bum roll, which is like a pillow that goes at the back. As we get through into the 1600s, this stiff brocade is shifted and replaced with silk and back to the petticoats. By 1630, this contraction, the farthingale, is gone. There's also a shift to have the bodice laced over the top of the stomacher instead of this triangle showing through. And then from 1630, gowns are no longer open at the front, so no longer show the petticoats underneath, with the exception of court gowns, which were open. We also have a shift to have the dresses a bit more bustled at the back, which is where it's held up, almost scrunched up with ribbons and things. This develops by 1715 into what's called the sack dress, the mantua, or the watteau, based on a series of paintings that remain of this era. This is also called a robe à la Française. This dress from the front is very similar in multiple styles, but to me this French style, it has giant box pleats at the back that go all the way down. They're not fitted at all, almost giving a cape-like appearance. This developed from men's dressing gowns called banyans that were like casual house coats, inspired by India and the new conquests that Britain had over there at the time. We then shift back to the hoop skirts, but this time the front and back are flatter, creating an oval shape, and this continues to get wider and instead becomes hoops on each side, a bit like a donkey carrying baskets, and this is where the name panniers comes from. These get exceedingly wide. Especially in 1770, these contraptions became hinged, so you could hold up each side individually, like fold them up, so you could pass through doors and sit next to people and stuff. This then gets replaced again by pulling this back into a bustle, and this is known as a polonaise. It's all tied up at the back. And then in 1785, we moved to the levite, which is, instead of being tied up, there is this bum roll there that we've had in previous centuries. But this is the first time that we actually see the ankle. It's seen as quite revolutionary, especially because there's hardly anything else under it. There's only the muslin underlayer and the velvet over. After the French Revolution, 1789, France again takes a leading role with the robe en chise. This is based on what had previously been an undergarment. So it had a much shorter waist, so the waist was a lot higher up. The fabric flows over the breasts and then is tied underneath to create this shape, and little puff sleeves as well at this time. This becomes increasingly tailored. And we also have the use of a spencer, which is a short jacket that's the same length worn over the top. This has even bigger sleeves and was often in a bright colour. We see the size of the sleeves growing as we move from the 1810s forward. By the 1820s, there is a need for more undergarments to support this shape, with sleeve supports becoming a thing. As the sleeves grow larger and larger, these becoming known as leg of mutton sleeves. You can also see the waist is slowly dropping a tiny bit as the volume at the base grows again. The 1840s becomes the closest we have to a more natural shape, mainly created by darts rather than separate pieces, and continuing this fashion for the sloped shoulders. This item is from the museum's own collection. It was going to be in my exhibition because it's a great example of this style. However, it has been worn in this example to show how it would be adapted for pregnancy. The dress itself is damaged, which is why I could not use it in the exhibition. These are called silk shatters, and they make the dress really fragile to touch. From here, the skirts get wider again. We have a return to an understructure, but this time it's the crinoline. This is quite similar to the ones we've had before from the bell-shaped farthingale onwards. But this time it's a lot lighter, which provides much more flexibility and movement within it. As you can see, these get increasingly wide, and then it slowly moves back to become an almost oblong from front to back under the dresses. From here, we return to the bustle. Throughout the 1870s, there's a variety of different styles of bustles and of ways to support them, changing how they're pinned back, held up, whether this is with ruffles and frills and similar. So moving to the 1880s, this bustle is no longer the focus point. It's the rows of frills and decoration at the front, as you can see in these pictures. From here, the sleeves go out again at the top, and we have the separation in the appearance of the top and the bottom half, either practically or through aesthetics. The front becomes increasingly out to produce a kind of S-bend effect, and this is where our mourning dress within the exhibition comes in. This is Stories and Stitches. It's an exhibition about how what clothing can tell us about how women lived in the past. So it talks about the changing expectations, so changes over time, such as what the ideal body shape was, but also looking at things like working women, so the women that never sat at home and did nothing, as some stereotypes suggest, because they had to survive for their family. So it talks about class, different social contexts such as war, and then it also looks at why women broke expectations,